Hello, everyone. Welcome. Get comfortable. You are listening to episode 0 of Pambazuka podcast. I'm the host, Aysam Al-Kurghli, and also the social media editor here at Pambazuka News. One has to be honest. Starting a podcast in 2026 feels a little bit like showing up to a protest with a megaphone, and everybody else is using TikTok, for example. But that's exactly why we're doing this for. For 20 years, Pambazuka has been the digital town square for Pan-Africanist thought, the place where we publish the long, difficult essays that deconstruct power while providing analysis from the standpoint of global Africa. But the media landscape in the last 20 years has truly shifted. Attention spans have shortened, but the need for deep analysis hasn't gone anywhere. It just moved and shifted into our ears, into our commutes, and into our headphones. At the same time, reading isn't a thing of the past, it's a habit of the old, but the youth who want facts and information with evidence, Pambazuka News is the source. The goal need not to be a complete shift in pursuing an audiophile audience, but a shrewd and varied presentation of the insightful and impactful contents of Pambazuka and what it offers. From the newsletter reads to the interviews, audios and videos containing the contents on the website, and the audiovisual forms that will be taking place in the weeks and months to come. We here in Pambazuka News have asked ourselves, what if we took the fierce and feisty spirit of archives and turned it into a conversation? For this episode 0, we're not jumping straight into the headlines, though trust me, we have a lot to discuss. Just look at the recent issues. We have been dissecting and discussing the revolutionary philosophies of Malcolm X, Patrice Lumumba, Frantz Fanon, amongst many others. We have also interrogated NATO's shadow over Africa and the Third World. We have explored Cuba's enduring solidarity with the African continent and global Africa. And then coming up, we also have a deep dive into the ugly underbelly of imperialism, migration, and even what the Epstein files mean for the African masses. But before we get into all of this, I'm joined by the two associate editors of the Pambazuka News, Peter Bambir and Mahd Al-Habti Mariam, or Peter and Mahi. They are two of the people steering this Pambazuka ship, and so to our longtime readers, welcome back. You know why we are here. To our listeners, welcome home. This is the episode 0 of Pambazuka News, so let's get into it. Peter and Mahi, thank you so much for doing this and finding the time. I know that we're all on different time zones, and this really shows how the struggle is truly internationalist and global. So we're aware that Pambazuka has spent years and years editing text, but speaking into a microphone feels slightly different. How are you feeling about expanding Pambazuka from the page to people's ears?
Peter, maybe you want to get us started?
Thank you, Isam. This is a dream come true. As I said, when Pambazuka News returned from the hiatus, we were also interested in reaching the African youth and the global youth in general. While some youths still read published texts as we have on our website and other media, many have shifted considerably to the audio and the visual spaces, especially on social media. Pambazuka has been planning to bring back the episodes and conversations that had begun on social media before the hiatus. It is therefore an exciting situation to get back in touch with the millions of readers and audience who are in the social media community. I find it very exciting, and speaking to the mic and turning text into audio comes with its own excitement and also challenges. Pambazuka is determined. We at Pambazuka are determined to bring the authoritative voice that exists in text format into audio and visual forms for our cherished audience and contributors.
Mahi will also speak about how in our coming issues there will be a lot of discussions about data, about media, about what people have been calling cognitive warfare, media warfare, and psychological warfare. And this is just one part of that warfare that global Africa is being waged against. And while at the same time it is enduring, given the fact that it's fighting the empire. But let's talk about Pan Africanism now.
I could start us off with that one. We did a special issue on the centennial of Malcolm X, Patrice Lumumba, and Frantz Fanon. These men are more than just Pan-Africanists. They stand beyond just who they are. They stand for ideas that have helped us shape the liberation movement and moved it forward. You initially talked about cognitive warfare and where Pambazuka sits right now in the current conjuncture and what role we will play. Part of bringing this special issue is reigniting the thought and the process of liberation into our readers' minds when we were back and when we did the relaunch, because it is high time that we think about the ideas that all these three men were thinking about. Left many lessons for us, be it Patrice Lumumba, who died standing for the Congo, who is central to Pan-Africanism and the liberation of the continent of Africa. Patrice Lumumba stands for something that today we must think of when we look at Congolese minds, the exploitation of Congolese peoples. Similarly, Frantz Fanon, his contribution to liberation and psychological warfare, it's high time right now. Pambazuka is expanding part of our digital footprint because we know that we need to be at the forefront of this war on media, because we need to control the narrative coming out of Africa, about global Africa, about ourselves, about our histories, and about where we're going and moving forward to. All these three thinkers speak to all of what Pambazuka has been doing for the last few decades. It was necessary to have a special issue.
We also had the last issue on Africa Liberation Day prior to this session that focused largely on the World Cup. We just wrapped up that issue because it talked about Pan Africanism in the 21st century. It's not just something historical, but it is something that liberation needs to happen now. It's not a finish line, but a continuous, iterative struggle. So, what does liberation look like in 2026 from psychological, digital, economic, and political aspects? So, either Peter or Mahi.
Thank you so much, Mahi, for that intervention. The ideas of Malcolm X, Patrice Lumumba, and Frantz Fanon need not be understood solely as products of their historical moment, but rather as enduring frameworks that extend beyond the period in which they were presented to the global African space. In the same way, we will do ourselves a great disservice if we forget the ideas of many of our ancestors who led the liberation struggles across the continent and global Africa. When we try to situate these ideas as past thoughts, we present a misunderstanding of the continuities and the structural outcomes of the African and the global African experience. The point is, whatever happened to Africans and what has constituted the African memories has continuities. These continuities manifest in the psychological framing of colonized peoples. Even if now they are independent, the structures and the systems that continue to shape their lives and the living conditions of Africans and peoples of African descent have not changed. The tools and theorization these ancestors authored continue to be of great significance, both in explaining the continuing African reality and in appreciating the instrument that could be purposed or repurposed to confront current and persisting issues. Some people will argue that many of the challenges the African is facing are not necessarily new. Of course, that has framed the quest for the dignity of the African person and the dignity of the global African human. It has not been different from when these ancestors were calling for the struggle to reclaim the dignity of the African everywhere. They brought various theories and conversations around what tools we could use in the struggle to secure freedom and transform the material condition of Africa. And these tools are very important to every African and every human being who want to secure dignity for themselves and for peoples of African descent. There is continuity. I see a continuity, even in the current issue we publish and in the African Liberation Day special issue that we publish. Quite significantly, the development in the victory of the declaration of the transatlantic slave trade as the gravest crime against humanity speaks to the victories that have been accumulated over time, to the struggles of our ancestors, those who resisted enslavement, whether it was on the ship, in the open field, the Maroons in the forest, or the Haitians who led the way in the revolution to rid the Africans of subjugation. All these forces offer us a significant lens to appreciate the victories that have been won over the years, the culmination we have had in this declaration, and what other spheres of struggle exist for peoples of African descent in going beyond this declaration around transatlantic enslavement, and also the digital spaces and other new fronts that are opening for the Pan-African struggle. I would say that the African youths of our time and also people of old have a lot to learn from the tools bequeathed onto us by these ancestors. And the theories they offered us are very important in thinking about freedom, in thinking about struggles, in thinking about the psychology of the global African and all there is about liberation and emancipation. Psychologically, mental slavery and the internalization of colonial subjugation and other forms of indoctrination that happened in the period from enslavement to colonialism and even new colonial interventions. There is still needs to decolonize the mind, and the theories and philosophies of Frantz Fanon, Ngugi wa Thiong'o, and all those ancestors matter. And they need to get rid of the internalized colonial cliches that limit African agency and that strips the African of any self-worth. So psychologically, there is this kind of liberation that needs to be done. In the digital spaces, the works include preventing exploitation and increased forms of extractivism and rather rechanneling these digital spaces to tell our story, the African story. Economically, we have the struggle towards winning the African government from the tutelage and conditionalities that are often set by Bretton Woods institutions to the detriment of the transformation and improvement in the well-being of the African people. And at the same time, we are confronted with an internal struggle, which is also about predatory and compradorial African government who have little to no interest in the material conditions and well-being of Africans. Politically, imperialism is despite all the struggles that is going and the multipolarity that is occurring in our world, imperialism is still manifesting in diverse forms. So the liberation struggle is also about resisting forms of imperialism and neo-imperialism, hyper-imperialism, and neo-colonialism in any form, in any dimension, and all the militarism that goes along with it, and also overcoming divisive politics that is working very hard to stagnate or reverse the gains that have been made in forging African unity and other continental effort towards the transformation of Africa and its people.
Let me just add, because it's worth plugging in our Africa Liberation Day issue, which was our May issue, still found up on our website. It was excellent because it discussed what African liberation is about. Our issue discussed what is going on in Haiti. Jemima Pierre talked about the attempts to recolonize Haiti and the kinds of extraction that is ongoing and the forms of occupation Haitians are facing. At the same time, we had David Abdullah submit an extensive and excellent piece on Cuba because African liberation is entwined with Cuban liberation and global Africa. If you look beyond particular countries in that piece, we held different articles, like the one Peter was saying. We had the New Vanguard African Youth as the Awakening Intelligentsia of 21st Century, which spoke about the role African youth are currently playing and are yet to play in Africa's liberation. We had excellent pieces from Willie Matunga about liberatory sexuality and Julia Lynn Walker about women's role in liberation. What Pambazuka is offering is not only a Sankofa, a dip into our past to meet the current moment, but we're also asking our readers and all who have led us to this moment to look beyond and think about what liberation looks like, how far we have gotten this far, and how we are going to get even further. I think the Africa Liberation Day issue, special issue, did touch upon that in excellent ways. I'll stop there, and Isam, I can ask you a question perhaps. I know we've done another special issue, which is about the geopolitical chessboard. We published a hard-hitting special issue on NATO in April of 2025, and another one on Cuba in February 2026. To the outsider, these might seem like distant, disparate foreign policy issues, but to a Pan-Africanist, they are domestic policy. Can you unpack that as you also contributed to that issue? Why does NATO's expansion and Cuba's blockade directly affect a farmer in Kenya or a miner in DRC? And why is it necessary for Pambazuka to address these things?
I think there's an issue. You look at how Western mass media, Western articulation of global affairs, they're always articulating the world from their perspective that tries to promote unity for them. Whenever there's a unity against them, they try to cause division. It's an old tactic of trying to make everything, you know, distinct, unrelatable for the third world. That third world's too diverse. It's too. There's a lot of multiplicities. But then for the first world, it's all acting a cohesion. The global north is all a unit, you know. And what do I mean by that? So, for example, you have countries in the global south and north working together in security, working together in economics, working together in foreign interventions. But when global south countries get together, they get framed, look, these are just authoritarian groups. They are terrorists. They are oppressing their local minorities. There's a need to balkanize this country, that country, and so forth. So there's a lot of obfuscation of the same struggle that exists for the people of the global south. They try to disorient the compass. They focus on the erasure of history to make us more oblivious towards what happened to us. And then, for example, like we bring up Cuba, we bring up NATO because if we go back to Southern Africa liberation, be it in Angola, Zimbabwe, and South Africa itself, we had that issue published back in February on Cuba. The focus was on Cuba. Why? Because it was, you know, how the Cuban Revolution was led by Dr. Fidel Castro and so many other comrades, hasn't only transformed the Cuban society, but became a model for the whole world. Because they didn't want to build socialism only within, but they also thought of international solidarity. And this is not the normative tendency of just trying to think globally without really understanding the local dynamics. They really understood it that it's an extension of the struggle. And so even Dr. Fidel mentioned that when they went and fought next to the Angolans, they said Cuba is going home because there were a lot of Afro-Cubans and still are. And so, if you think about it, how did South Africa attacking Angola in the Battle of Quito Carnavale? They have, you know, saw them in front of their eyes, Cubans fighting alongside Angolans and many other African liberation fighters to fight off that apartheid regime that existed in South Africa. So only when South Africa, the so-called Invincible Army, was incapable of defeating that collective struggle of Cubans and Angolans, you know, fighting next to each other, that saw settler colonialism and apartheid as unacceptable for us Africans, they started seeing their kids going to the battlefield coming back in coffins. That's when apartheid started to fall. And this is thanks to Cuba. And this is when they start to even have the concessions to end it. We can also have a discussion about whether it really ended or not, this apartheid that we're talking about. Um, the same thing about NATO. When people say NATO attacked Libya, that attack was not only on Libya in 2011, it was an attack on Africa. If you look at the correspondences behind the scenes, it was what Libya represented for the African Union, for African unity, how Libya was spearheading the golden African dinar, how it was bankrolling the African Union, African Monetary Fund, African Development Bank. All these, people would say arbitrary institutions, but they were very well organized, very well orchestrated institutions to actually prevent and supplant the influences of the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank. So NATO's function has always been, and these aren't just my words or analysis, even Mark Rutte, who's the head of NATO, recently said that NATO has been the launchpad of US imperialism. We had that issue that focused on the attack on Yugoslavia, on the health consequences of NATO's interventions. And so when you ask the question, how does this relate to a farmer somewhere in Libya or Tanzania or Kenya or Zimbabwe, you look at what they try to put after their interventions. After they do these interventions, they balkanize Yugoslavia, they destroy Libya, and still the sanctions are lingering. They destroyed Iraq, which is so-called the Coalition of the Willing, just a different name for NATO. They destroyed Afghanistan. They push a neoliberal agenda that makes farmers in Libya, farmers in Kenya, obedient to the diktats of neoliberalism and the IMF and the World Bank, which is about accumulation, such that you open up your market to foreign seeds, potentially open up a market to genetically modified organisms, such that you become not reliant on your own soil and your own seeds. You become reliant on these terminator seeds that you import from elsewhere, because that was part of the agreement. Farmers in Kenya and Libya and so forth will have to accept these things, and they get into this cycle of ecological dependency. And so when you think of imperialism as a world system, how it operates, imperialists act in unison. And we should understand how that implicates us into that equation of US led imperialism, particularly. That's why, since we're having a chat, I'm going to throw a question at you, Mai, particularly, especially because you and Peter have proposed this issue on migration in the future, and I think it's going to get published any day now. And I know we have been having protests in Libya and South Africa that are quite xenophobic in the sense of not necessarily anti-black, because in South Africa it's not just that, it's the hatred of the foreign. In Libya it has been largely anti-black. This question of migration in the African continent, but also externally, a lot of people don't talk about migration within the continent. They talk about what's happening when they leave the continent to Europe and so forth. And so you have flagged this migration and paradigm as a future theme for us to focus on, while Europe is building walls and African youth are risking everything to cross the Sahara. And so how does Pambazuka plan to cover the root causes of migration without falling into the trap of victimhood, instead of framing it as a dire consequence of imperial extraction? In your view, Mahi?
Our upcoming special issue is going to be on migration of global Africa. The sub-themes and topics of interest are quite wide. We wanted to cover migration policy and management. We wanted to cover the politics behind and the terminologies that are used. We also wanted to have, especially considering what's happening intra-Africa, within Africa itself, we wanted to talk about migration within Africa. Something that most people don't know is most Africans do migrate within Africa itself. We wanted to highlight that. We are hoping Pambazuka has been a stage for authors like Samir Amin and Issa Shivji. These are people who've talked about labor and the movement of people and the coercion of movement of people in Africa and within Africa, and even within the rural-urban divide. We put out this call hoping that some of our readers would be able to engage some of these old titans who've been contributors of Pambazuka and help us rethink the current ongoing struggles we're witnessing from Libya and the Sahel region to the devastations we see. There can't be separated from what you describe about NATO's destruction in the region to the Red Sea and this flow of people to the Gulf and the reality of our people in the Gulf countries amidst this crippling war against Iran. There are a lot of things to unpack there. We're hoping our readers take this seriously because I think it is important to talk about what movement looks like in the 21st century and how to ensure that it becomes a right for our people because they are witnessing a lot of devastation and violence for it. And maybe Peter can expand on what I've said.
What the conversation on migration is bringing to the fore is an issue of human existence itself. The whole question around migration is a question about existence. As long as human beings exist, we are mobile beings. We move, and we are going to keep moving. Historically, people have moved across kingdoms, communities, and geographical spaces when there were no heavily policed border regimes. People could move and settle anywhere without a passport, without a visa. Then we invented the passport. Then came the visa in the advent of the state, the nation state, and whichever its forms have been. At the same time, we talk about dismantling borders in Africa. At the same time, we are careful about bringing people, allowing people with other passport to exist or to coexist with the people of other people of destination countries. Okay, and there is this sensitivity about who is allowed to migrate to work and who is refused. There is a criminal migrant or immigrant, and there is a polished, skilled, developed migrant who is always welcome, especially in spaces where there are challenges and shortage of workforce or labor. The migration dynamic is interesting, and now there is this rise of right-wing politics, which is increasingly criminalizing migrants, even when these migrants did not come without passport. It makes the conversation worrying. This is another line of discussion, and if this were happening in the West alone, you would say it is a Western phenomenon, but it is also manifested in spaces within Africa. The UN population division have shown that if around 20, as of 2024, about 20 million Africans migrated within the continent, and South Africa is a host to a lot of them, and so many other African countries are also hosts. We are pushed to think of what the call for unity and Pan-African solidarity mean in this era, where there's a rise and pushback even within the continent against immigrants, especially immigrants who are of black skin. The migration issue unravels these dynamics and the policies and politics driving hatred and economic conditions, engineering the migration within the so-called push and pull conversation, and also the realities of immigrant. What is not lost in this conversation is the realities of remittances and the businesses immigrants bring to whichever spaces they inhabit. In all the conversations and discussions, we have not lost sight of the fact that remittances are sometimes weaponized, and we know US even taxes remittances. So in a way, it is not only the sending countries that are benefiting from remittances, even the host countries are benefiting from not only the taxes and the work permit of these immigrants and the other contributions they are making to the economies, but also by taxing the remittances they send to their respective home countries. So the migration discourse is complicated, and the articles in the migration issue are very interesting. from the minority experience that can be said about the descendants of immigrants who are scoring goals for several Western countries, to the asylum seekers whose future and life are unknown, to many other contexts and regimes and policies within which migration is manifesting, and also the new forms of organization and mobilization we are seeing from refugees across Libya, Niger, and Tunisia in pushing back against externalization and criminalization and invisibilization of their experiences in these spaces. So yeah, there's a lot happening within the migration space. We look forward to this issue in all the complexities it is bringing forth to the reader, and in presenting a nuanced conversation about what is happening in the migration space in both Africa and outside the continent.
Just to piggyback to Peter, I know we have spoken a lot about Epstein question, but particularly what does it mean for the African masses? In the future, we'll be having an issue on that. So very briefly, what do you think it will be about? We haven't put that call for papers yet, but just your ideas.
I look forward to that issue on the Epstein file, because there are many geopolitical events going on now. The attempt to silence it through the courts and through other spaces, and the rich materials that exist in the Epstein files. Sex trafficking is an issue that is still worrying humanity, and sexual exploitation is a challenge we still are grappling with as humans. The whole geopolitics around the files themselves, and the political power and clout the Epstein file project, I believe we will have a blast of an issue when the linkages begin to emerge about how the powerful implicated in the Epstein file are not only the rich in Europe, but may possibly have counterparts on the African continent and West Asia and other parts of the world. I believe the Epstein issue will push humanity to reconsider human and sex trafficking, and give it a central stage in a deserved central stage in conversations about human rights, and about liberation, and about freedom, and also about accountability and reckoning. I look forward to it, because whether it is in West Asia, North Africa, or even within the African continent, there are news items, documentaries, and individual testimonies that point to a lot of sexual exploitations going on. And this links up to the Epstein files with all the political power. Not everyone is implicated, but some sort of possible reach, even on the African continent. I think that issue will engineer a very interesting conversation on the topic around sexuality, freedom, and exploitation.
Thanks, Peter. Mahi, anything you want to add?
Just to add, there's so much there to explore, and what we've seen in the news so far has not helped us understand the extent to which these networks affect Africa or African women. The focus has been solely on European women, and beyond even the kinds of women exploited under this network, you have the head of the DP World Ports, a guy who was Epstein's close friend, and DP World Infrastructure's footprint on Africa itself, and that relation with Zionist connections is still underdeveloped. There's so much to be explored, and we're hoping our readers and contributors can help us excavate some of these stories.
We eventually look forward to interviewing those people because that's a good segue to our next bridging and to our bridging of the next generation. And this is the notion of the old guard versus the new wave. And I don't think first this is a good articulation even of this question, because the old guard and new wave are continuity of history. And so Pambazuka, once we launched, relaunched at the beginning of last year, 2025, we realized that there's a massive loyal base of academics, activists, and struggle veterans, whatever you want to call them. But the media landscape has changed. So how do you keep the intellectual rigor that our veterans expect while making sure that a 22-year-old scrolling on Instagram does not, get toned out? What does this translation look like for this podcast? Any of you?
I want to say, and Peter can correct me, we will not compromise the editorial integrity of Pambazuka News. We are very aware of the era we're in. The digital era has come with consequences that have impacted reading, writing, and the practices we've used to transfer knowledge thus far. We will meet that moment. This podcast is our first step in meeting that moment. Pambazuka's power and his signature is strong, hard-hitting analysis from a global African point of view. Whether it's within the citations you're including, where you're having your sources come from, or who the author is, how consistently they ensure valid information reaches our readers. I do not believe we will compromise on the integrity of our editorial pieces. Like you said, we are in a new era, and we are excited to reach younger folks who, even if they must meet us through social media, can come and join the rigorous analysis process that Pambazuka has upheld. That will remain our signature, but we're excited to branch out, expand, and learn a lot from the youth about how information can be passed and made accessible.
I agree with you, Mahi. The appeal of Pambazuka to the readers is the fact that even opinions are laced with facts. We accept opinion pieces, but we expect opinions to be well informed. When there are quotations and citations of people, even in an opinion, we expect authors to put in the possible references for the reader to be able to track those references themselves and visit them directly if they want, where these statements were made and what they themselves can make of it by listening or viewing the data themselves or the information source themselves. That makes Pambazuka News sit between as a publication space that spans journalism and peer review journal articles. So this mid-range positioning gives Pambazuka an authoritative footprint that we will not want watered down. The work of the podcast is not to reduce the rigor Pambazuka News provides. We are still insistent on rigor whenever authors produce any article. The same rigor is going to translate into what comes out of the podcast. We are not going to leave the materials in written forms only. We want the materials to be in oral form and video form so that the younger generation and the youth can listen to this podcast even when they don't have time to read pages of text. Perhaps the podcast will increasingly link them back to the rigorous conversations in written form on the Pambazuka page. This is a kind of intergenerational mixing we are doing. Yes, the digital landscape has changed, and our youth are more interested in what is trending on IG, Snapchat, TikTok, YouTube, LinkedIn, and other spaces that offer brief and quick watch and reads. When they want to read a piece or a longer piece or an article or a text, yeah, Pambazuka News website is there, and they can tap into the rich text that exists in our archives. Pambazuka is therefore tapping into all its constituencies to make sure none of our readers and authors are left behind in bringing informative, insightful, and authoritative conversation around Africa global Africa and contemporary issues in the world.
Then I can move us to the next question about what is coming. Give us the vision. Will the podcast be an audio version of our weekly newsletters? Will we be doing long-form narrative storytelling or raw, unedited debates between Pan-African schools of thought? How do you see our podcast expanding?
I think that indicates how sometimes we are still stuck in the written language. I forget even the language of the younger generations, though we're still young, but there are younger people than us. I've seen how, me personally, I cannot pretend I'm not also a consumer of media, or any of us as not consumers of media. We see what has been working for other groups, what has been working for other thinkers, and how they get their messages across. The old form used to be just check out a book from a library or buy a book, now transition to audiovisual and so forth. In our classrooms, even when we teach, we notice that the younger generation, you cannot just tell them this is the grammar rule and they will learn it, or this is how the equation works and they will learn it. You need to create games and things to entice them and make them more interested. So what does this mean for us Pambazuka as we're expanding, not transitioning, but expanding our operations? We'll be taking our written form and transforming it into short videos, which is kind of a quick glimpse of what the article is about, either with my voice, Mahi's voice, or any of the volunteers we have, to read a transcript transformation of an article as opposed to just reading the article. There's the other part where sometimes fantastic academic articles get written and would be open source, and we would love to republish them, and we'd invite those authors to speak with them. We ourselves have also republished and have been publishing fantastic things by great scholars such as William Mutunga, Horace Campbell, Patricia Daly, you, Peter, and Mahi have also contributed to Pambazuka. In having you come and speak about what you have written, people connected to Center's power, you know the intricacy of what's happening. That will be part of the cultural production of knowledge production that we will be doing. In addition, we will also have potentially different shows. So it's not just going to be one Pambazuka podcast. The Pambazuka will be the umbrella. There will be that main show, but then there will also potentially be the Pambazuka Salon. I haven't decided what the name will be, or the Bandung Salon. And this will be more of an informal conversations. It could be just the three of us and so forth. In addition, the format-wise, it's not just going to be myself or you, Peter, Mahi, kind of running this ship. We can, if you are interested in interviewing somebody, we can set up things for you to go and interview them. So not you two, but listeners, right? So if you're involved in a movement and you want to interview somebody and use us to put up your final output, we'll be happy to do that. So, in this way, we will cast a wide net to catch the attention of people in global Africa and people interested in anti-imperialism and also interested in Pan-Africanism. It requires a lot of different tools. So the written one is the key one, but we need to speak in different languages and modes. So this is what the expansion we hope it will mean. Now I'll open the floor to both of you, to the new listener, Peter and Mahi. If there's a young African or global African listening to who feel to us and feels like Pan-Africanism is an old man's game, and I say old man here intentionally as opposed to an old person's game, or just it's a hashtag. What's your one sentence pitch to them to follow and engage Pambazuka, engage with the questions of African unity? So this is the first question. The second question related to the veterans, to the veteran reader, to the person who has been reading Pambazuka since its inception, who might be skeptical of us moving not from into, but more expanding into audio. What do you say to reassure them that this podcast isn't dumbing down the struggle, but finding a new frequency for it?
I want to start. I want to drop it here. I want to say we are in a global revolutionary situation, and it is now the time for global Africa. I strongly believe that. Pan-Africanism is our history of struggle, our history of liberation, our history of unity, but most importantly, it's our destination and future. I welcome everyone to contribute to Pambazuka News because that is where we start building the world we want to see, which is already underway. I welcome all who seek to build a new Africa, a new global Africa, a new way of life for all of us to come and contribute their efforts to Pambazuka News.
Probably more than a sentence, if you permit me. And I hope I can say a sentence and put commas and semicolons across this sentence or sentences. First of all, every movement, struggle, and cause has contradictions, at least many do. Some of those contradictions may lead members in the struggle to question whether the struggle is worth it and whether the cause really exists on paper and if it is worth pursuing at all. Some of these contradictions resurface when we have this conversation about what is happening on the African continent, events in South Africa, the struggle for African unity, Let the Borders Fall campaign, and the failure of that 1963 movement where Africa could have become a united, strong force. Nobody is willing and bold enough to say, okay, let Africa be one, let Africa be united. To the current Pan-African surges in the Sahel, it looks to the younger person, what are you talking about? What is Pan-Africanism? Because I know when I go here, I'm not accepted. But I know there is some kind of unity in the Sahel. There are these contradictions. Part of the contradictions you may even find is that there is European Union version of Pan-Africanism. And that also kind of creates ambiguities, right? So what is Pan-Africanism? Are we talking about the EU Pan-Africanism? Or is there now a Sahel Pan-Africanism? Is there an Nkrumahist Pan-Africanism? What is Pan-Africanism? Some talk about Pan-Africanism with a big P, which is focused at the state level. Talk about unity at the state level, like a top-down kind of consideration in Pan-African engagement, and others talk of Pan-Africanism with a small p, one which is focused on people. These various renditions can be kind of appear enormous, maybe, or troubling to the African youth. But one thing is sure, Pan-Africanism take notice of the historical and continuing unity of the African experience, regardless of color, religion, race, and other markers. Every person of African descent, whether on the continent or outside, even if that person decides and says, I'm not an African, like coming from a family and deciding you are not part of that family, it doesn't technically make you not part of that family, though you choose to say you are not. Pan-Africanism is not a dead movement. The idea that Africans are one, our experiences have been one. One African is not less mistreated than the other from either East Africa, North Africa, or anywhere. You are African, no matter the layers. We were all at some point, mostly all at some point colonized. Our ancestors were colonized in one way or another, or enslaved. No matter their position, we have gone through some measure of oppression or live our lives within the structures that these historical injustices established. These common experiences, our common heritage, and the need for collective action to ensure we secure the dignity of the African person, and that this dignity is not only restored but never taken away. I doubt any African or person of African descent will reject that. That is what Pan-Africanism is about, calling for unity and togetherness of people with this shared experience in order to bring transformation in their material conditions, right? And spiritual conditions too. This conversation from the Pambazuka standpoint is that we do not separate political leadership from the grassroots and the people. We believe these things work together. We believe this different group of people work together. But core mobilization is not and must not be at the state level per se. It has to be with ordinary people who foreground and give legitimacy to political leadership. Pan-Africanism, to the young person listening, is not a dead movement, no matter the contradictions. Contradictions are the more reasons we should work together, because there is beauty in diversity. When we come around the common point of what we want to achieve, Africa will be great. The same goes to the veteran reader and author. Your work and labor are not in vain. Your task is not over. The struggles you began have not ended. Let's continue with the young, no matter the weariness current situation may present. Let's work together to ensure the dignity of the African person and the transformation we all seek for peoples of African descent is secured. And we secure that transformation now and for future generations. We welcome all contributions to Pambazuka. Write your incisive articles, write your commentaries, write your research, your findings, and your advocacy. Write them to us. We work with artists to help you bring your piece to the best states you would love them to be. You will love working with us. We welcome you on this train. The podcast is not throwing away articles and intellectual contributions. It will give it will amplify the voice of whatever you write. It will give your submission more reach on Pambazuka News and to our various audience from those who read it on the website and those on social media. Come on, join us in the struggles for liberation. Join us in the fight for social justice, in the advocacy for human rights, and in the campaign for a transformative Africa that creates the conditions for reconstruction and to improve the well-being and life of its peoples and secures and maintains its dignity and humanity. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Peter. And that was, I guess, that was kind of a good wrap up. Personally, I don't think Pan-Africanism is dead. A lot of people are actually turning towards it right now because we are realizing what Nasser said, what Nkrumah said, what Steve Biko said, and so many other Pan-Africanists have said throughout this time still rings true. One way to twist things, they say, is that this Pan-Africanism is something of the past, it's outdated, but ironically, it is so timeless, such that it's getting constant resurgence. It cannot be buried. And so those analyses are still relevant today, be it the theory, in how we analyze the system, or how we actually fight the system. And so thank you both for finding the time to do this quick kind of conversation, bonfire chat about what is the Pambazuka podcast will be about. Listeners, if you have thoughts, comments, you want to write to us, you want to actually contribute to the podcast, you want to volunteer for Pambazuka, our emails are available on our website, and that is pambazuka.org. Without further ado, I would leave you with a Thomas Sankara quote that I think every Pan-Africanist knows and loves. You cannot carry out a fundamental change without a certain amount of madness. In this case, it comes from nonconformity. The courage to turn your back on the old formulas, the courage to invent the future. Be the Pan-Africans that invent the future. Thank you so much.